At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 300 programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
We are lighting the candle, a world that works. Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Correll. We've been doing this for a while. We are questing for empowerment. You know, language gives us access to so many things and building worlds and all that. And I'm really, really happy to be here. And it's been a minute or two, but I am pleased as punch that you're here today, Jan Jeremias, my buddy and partner in world empowerment. And then also at the same time, it's been a while since the three of us did it together, but we have our protege, Austin Jacob, who brings chops of his own. He's basically out there in the world. The language tools that you use are far updated to the ones that I'm educated with, and I learn something every time you and I speak. I think it's fantastic. But all of that said, we were talking about, I don't know, have either of you heard the word anachronism? An anachronism would be in a story somewhere if there's a device in that story that had not yet been invented. So, for instance, in the time of Paul Revere, if somebody was using a 30-06, somebody who's contemporary to right now, they would probably not even think that didn't exist when Paul Revere was riding across New England saying, the regulars are coming, the regulars are coming. I don't think he ever said the British were coming. I think we knew who the enemy was. So on to the next thing. We were talking about love means you never have to say you're sorry before we logged in here. And of course, until you've either read Love Story or have seen the movie that came out in the 1960s, it seems like 68 or 69, if I remember correctly. It could have been earlier or later. But the point is, it was about, I would say that was the first really popular movie that came out where there was a woman using foul language every other word for an hour and a half. It was different, wasn't it, Jan?
Yeah, that's so funny because I actually don't remember that about the movie.
Yeah.
That's not what comes to mind.
No.
I think it was, to me, one of the first movies where there was like a woman who wanted more than to be like to stay at home. Like, it was a real, to me, it was like the movie where it actually, this woman who was, went to a really prestigious school, who wanted like a life beyond, not to belittle being a homemaker or a housewife. No, like I'm not, but it was like one of the first movies that actually kind of portrayed that as an option for women. So I think that's why the movie always struck me, because I was like, oh my gosh, finally, this whole it was like the ultimate women's movement movie, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was. It really was, in my opinion as well. Like the first time we got to see on the big screen, feminism, comes up against the convention,
Right.
and his family was old money. He went to Harvard. He played hockey for Harvard, and I think, what did she go to? Smith or Radcliffe? Probably
Cliff
Radcliffe. Yeah.
Radcliffe, yeah.
So that's as they did, because in those days Radcliffe was an all girls school. I don't know if it still is. I think they went co-ed somewhere along the way. Um, and the point was is that she used guttural language, and she stood up for herself, and she loved to call him. I mean, he would walk into a room, and he'd be like an Adonis, absolutely beautiful, every hair in place and all. She'd call him, "Oh, go sit down, preppy," and no respect whatsoever. And he loved it. He ate it up.
And she came from a family of, I think her father was like a baker, like was a so
Yep.
somewhat like, a laborer kind of thing. And
Yeah.
his father was like, I think this prestigious attorney or something.
Yeah.
And
Money.
so money. And so it was just such a class differentiation. And then also this whole idea of women. And then the other thing I remember about it is she was studying music. I think she was a pianist, if I remember correctly. It really, something like that, I think.
Yeah.
And it was just this feeling of like, and she was beautiful. So it wasn't like she had given up, like, all of a sudden she became this bookworm kind of thing. And then all of a
Right.
sudden she looked like a librarian, kind of thing. It was
A
kind of,
hot librarian, actually.
and I like, yeah, I mean, I shouldn't say that because my sister-in-law was a legal librarian and kind of thing, but it's her degree. But it was just that feeling of like she was like kind of like I would look at her and I'd say, this is a woman who I want to be. Like I want
Right.
to be like her because she had, what I might have thought would have at that time, which my perspective has changed since then on this kind of stuff. But at that time, I thought that's who I want to be.
Well, and you know what? You were not alone. I think probably half of the educated women in the world
Absolutely.
saw that movie. And the way that Eric Siegel wrote the opening, Austin, just to kind of bring it into a little bit more, the whole thing was presented like a fairy tale. And the opening line is something like, "What can I say about the girl who died, except for she loved Bach, Beethoven, the Beatles, and me?" you know so that's kind of strange company, Bach, Beethoven, Beatles, and the preppy from Harvard, who is a big star on the hockey rink. But every once in a while there's a movie that comes along, and it shatters the previous paradigm, and it opens up all sorts of new things. There's so many possibilities that were created in that movie, and whenever possibilities are created that way, they're either good or bad, right? You don't just get one outcome. It's like there's always some people that really think that's the greatest thing since sliced bread. You've seen The Matrix, right?
Hmm.
Yes, good big fan.
So that completely destroyed anybody's idea of what special effects could ever go back to. After that movie, with the cameras that swung around, Keanu Reeves and the other actors, nobody would ever accept, a cheap kung fu fight in a movie anymore. Is like that's as good as it gets. The Wachowski brothers really outdid themselves, and they got a really good team of people to produce the movie. So we have these paradigm busters that come along, and some people call it a shift, and other people, it just destroys their memory of what came before.
And as you're saying that, it reminds me of years ago. I went to in Boston. There's a computer museum,
Yeah.
and so I went, and at the time, especially going with my dad, because my dad worked in computers for since the beginning, and we spent the whole time going. I worked on that machine, and I worked on that machine, like as we walked down aisles. But I remember being so like, all of a sudden, it struck me as you looked at what was like the tricorder in Star Trek, and it was the model for the cell phone. I mean, that's what it was. I mean, and all of a sudden it like dawning on me after watching the show and growing up on the show, probably being before my time in some ways, but as a kid watching repeats and then sitting there and thinking to myself and not realizing, I think, much more till I was an adult, how much things like movies and everything played a role in, you know, in the way things progressed and in movement forward and possibility.
Yeah, and quite honestly, I don't know if either of you spend that much time watching any type of current, produced media or movies or TV shows and that sort of thing. But I'm nonplussed by the quality of stuff that's going on right now. I don't think there's a lot that's intended to feed the mind. I think a lot of it is just um, it's playing to certain people's interests and beliefs and all of that sort of thing. But I don't think there's anything out there that's intending to shatter paradigms, if you will. I don't know what it would be right now, and somebody could tell me, and I would watch it for sure. Always up for that kind of advice. There was a question in there somewhere, Austin.
Well, I got an answer. Gaia Streaming is I believe a reputable source of nurturing not only the mind but the body and the soul, and you can
Yep.
customize it. It's very integrated in ways that allow diverse interests to be explored. And as I said, I believe it's reputable. Everything with a grain of salt when it comes to what resonates with you and what doesn't. But from
Yeah.
just the vast amount of information that's out there, I do like Gaia Streaming thus far. So that's a great place. And we've been talking about. I wanted to kind of jump in, but I was listening to all the nuggets here between the movies and how movements like a movie can occur or be perceived collectively from these movies. And I kept having this thought run over and over and over. And I was like, oh, I want to share this. I wonder if they've thought of it this way. But we're all kind of creating the most amazing movie. And the reason why that thought kind of train of thought came in was when you described how the movie, Jan, kind of instilled that new possibility or a possibility, not even new. And when I think of a lot of the work that both of you are doing and we're all doing together here with empowerment, that's a lot of how I see it is the movies that we are creating, we don't always get to know or plan it in front of somebody and be like, it's good. This is going to be the ripple effect of this. But in our last podcast, Bill, we talked a little bit about integrity and how that unfolds. And this is a movie of integrity.
I love it.
And
And what possibility does that place for somebody who's lived in a life where there's been none?
Mhm.
I had to do an interesting exercise yesterday. I'm doing a program, and we had to write something about somebody we admire. So I chose a close friend of mine who I really admire her, and so I wrote about her. We didn't have to share it, but I wrote about her. I then shared it with her. So I decided that I was going to send it to her. And so she wrote back to me and she said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this is how you see me." And we were doing it as an exercise to kind of fine tune what we value. And so it was kind of like somebody I admire. And part of it was like I realized like the things that I admire in her, I truly value. Like those are things that are obviously very important to me, which I think I feel that she kind of embodies. And so I shared that with her, and she said, "I can't believe you wrote this about me. And I can't believe this is how you think of me." Now, she then gave it to her partner, who said, "Of course, I could see that." And she was like, "Thank you so much, because I think you and Jan are the only ones who share this," like kind of thing. I mean, she has kids and everything, so I'm sure, like, but it was just so interesting because how often do we not see ourselves in that
Exactly.
possibility or in that, in the same way that others see us, because we have this idea in our head of how we're supposed to be.
Exactly.
And I've been spending a lot of time there, with one lesson that I've learned from Austin and, about talking. And even in my mind, like if I meditate, I spend a lot of time there talking to myself and telling myself I shouldn't experience it this way. I shouldn't be thinking like that. I shouldn't be feeling like that. And I kind of redirect myself immediately out. It's kind of like, you shouldn't think like that. And I'm like, gone. Like, I'm go focus on your breath, and that's a really positive tool, let's say breath work or meditation. But I realize how quick I am to not want to go there. Like, it's just an observation I've come to over the last like 3 weeks that I've been parked and I haven't been able to move much.
Yeah.
I've just been like, oh my gosh, like I do not want to stay here. I avoid. I'm like, okay, I'm avoiding that. Like, okay, I'm avoiding that. And it's just been so interesting to me. And then now I've been sitting there and saying, can you stay here? Like, can you visit this for a little while? And I like the word visit because it means that I don't have to live there. Like, I can visit here and then I can decide I want to visit somewhere else. But it's just been such an interesting practice for me of late.
In the psych and medical world, I came across I have a friend, and he introduced have you ever heard of Johari window? The Johari window, Johari.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
Window.
Sounds familiar. Sounds very
It's I'm gonna butcher it, but go look it up on your own. But it's a psychoanalyzation. I don't know if it's an entire modality, but it's like a practice you were kind of describing. And there's 4 viewpoints that go into, say, like a square with a cross in the middle. And one of the viewpoints is, what do you think about yourself? Another is, what does this person think? Another is like another perspective of that, how somebody else thinks about it's something. It's a 4 different perspectives of what you are perceiving, and it's an interesting introspection, but also a tool to really get to know yourself. From other perspectives, and like you can share it with others and have laughs and learn more about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Johari window.
Okay, thanks. I'll have to look it up.
Well,
I know you can appreciate the science.
Yeah, I want to compliment you on both being able to notice this behavior in yourself, and then also putting an alternative thought in place to the one that you were thrown to. And it's really kind of interesting because people do get in the habit of having a feeling, and that they listen to the feeling that's non-descriptive, and then it gets tagged with words. So when that feeling comes, a sentence can come as well. And that's what they're avoiding, what comes after that sentence. And it takes a tremendous amount of both courage and self-awareness to both notice that it's happening and then make a choice, as you said, to continue visiting it for a minute longer. If I stay here just a little while longer, what will that do? And in some cases, it allows for that feeling and sentence to completely disappear, because there's this phenomenon that when you allow something to be presenced fully, there's no need for it to hang around anymore. It's not stuck to you any longer. It just goes away. Like all those things that you're not worried about today, you've forgotten about them. You've got more crap you could be worried about, but you're not. because you don't remember.
I think for me, it gives me the opportunity for me
Yeah.
to get curious about it, to actually look at it with a little bit of idea of, oh, this is very curious to me. Like that, like to kind of go to like, why do I feel that way? Or what is triggering me? Just as like I said, not to sit there and kind of get so wrapped up in it that I'm
Right.
going to analyze it, which is might be my tendency because my very analytical thinking. But just to sit there and say, okay, this is causing me angst or making me feel uncomfortable, or this made me feel uncomfortable. And let me visit this and see, get curious about it, and then just leave. Like I don't need to figure it all out, but I also don't want to spend, because I've learned avoidance doesn't work either, because I spend a lot of energy trying to compartmentalize it out. And I have this tendency, I know from my own experience, to want to control it, so control everything so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
Like it's like, what can I control in my life so that I don't feel like that? Because that makes me feel uncomfortable. So if I let it be, then I don't have to control anything. Because if it shows up, it shows up and it's not a big deal. That makes sense, so
It really does, and I think the other aspect to it is, um, we act as if speech sometimes is acting on us. The trigger part of it is something did something to us, and now we have to respond by either fight or flight, right? Those are which are thrown to right at the beginning, according to another guy with a beard. And I don't know if that necessarily translates into everybody's behaviors, but I think the more you're willing to observe and not be part of an instance that seems to be some sort of a failing event for you, if you're willing to observe and then realize it has nothing to do with you whatsoever, whatever it was that made a wave come over you, it could be a good feeling. You don't take credit for those either, but the ones that don't feel good, somehow we feel it's our fault. There's something wrong here. And what I
and
love about what you're saying is you don't have to get inside of it and figure out why. There is no why to these things.
but I also think that the things that and when I say trigger, it triggers because to me there's a feeling that's like I feel it somewhere in my body. Like
Right.
there is a reaction that happens. It's not just words. So it's not just out there, okay, someone said a word or whatever. There's an actual sensation that happens.
Yep.
And it's much more that.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Sensation that I might be able to breathe through. And I've learned through the years of not having to identify that feeling and give it a name and a label. Like I don't do that anymore because that doesn't, to me, there's words sometimes are not sufficient to whatever that feeling is. Like I can't articulate it. So I don't need to articulate it. But it's just that, but there is a reaction, a physiological reaction.
Asti, did you have a thought?
Yeah, what I hear the two of you talking about, one perspective take you could have on this is the strengthening of the muscle for responding versus reacting. And that can apply to language, that can apply to emotions, it can apply to you interpreting signals from your environment. And it can also go a layer of awareness deeper, and you're seeing, say, more on a quantum level, how the environment's also reacting to you. And
Right.
so it's, to me, it's while there's like a harmony or a middle way of balancing how you're responding versus reacting to the environment, and also affording the environment the same, like it's a bit honoring, rather, or acknowledging. That's where, like, how I kind of see observation. You're seeing how it's reacting to your response, and you're seeing how its response is to your react. Do you see how that's kind of playing in there? But that's here what I hear you guys talking about. And then, Jan, I heard you mention about curiosity. And yes, 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 there's a, I don't know the exact quote, but in Florence Scovel Shin's book, The Game of Life and How to Play It, there's a part where she talks about, look with wonder at that which is before you. And that's like one of my mantras. Literally, I actually have it written down here, but that's curiosity to me. But it's also seeing life from a sacred lens, and an empowered lens, a abundance lens versus a scarcity lens, a empowered lens versus a victim lens. um, it's not perfect. We're not meant to be perfect. We're imperfectly perfect, but that's why I called it a muscle, like a spiritual muscle, this responding versus reacting, bringing your power to you. Even in meditation and somatic work, it often will begin by recognizing that quantum interaction between your response and your react, getting your heart and your brain in coherence, things of that nature.
It's interesting. Great choice of words. When you stop and think about how we respond to things, whatever it be, we have a limited understanding of the term language, because it's all language. Any interaction that we have, object to object, with any animals, the wall, a truck, the tree, there's a conversation going on wherever there's some sort of an interaction. And then, you can be around animals and not have to say a word, and just move your head a little bit and make a little nod, and they know exactly what you're saying. If you've created a conversation in just one motion or one movement. And they do that with horses in dressage. They do it, with the dancing, military horses like the Lipizaners and the Spanish horses. There's this really wonderful conversation. It's a dialogue, and when it really is at a masterful level, it looks like there's nothing going on, which makes it really almost miraculous. The other thing that I like that you said was the coherence. That's a term that also has to do with alignment. It has to do with cohesive direction. The term for a laser is coherent light. And what does it take in order to create a laser? Having worked in the field for a while and having studied it a little bit, because I worked for three guys that all had PhDs, it takes a lot. It takes the fine tuning of all these optics. It takes the right kind of energy flowing into those optics, going back and forth and creating, like what you were talking before, like this action infers that action implies this action, which infers that action. And as it comes back around, then the next thing you know is you've got this plasma, in a tube that's brilliant light. And we do that with certain people. Like, it goes like really quickly, but you see somebody and you're automatically on the same wavelength. How does that happen?
Well,
I know both of you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and what you're describing to me, first of all, I would use the word communication.
Communication. Yep. I was waiting for that. Me and Bill talked about that.
Yeah, I would think about it. It's much more communication versus even dialogue, because there's a communication that's happening on a much deeper level or an energetic level. There's Austin's favorite thing, energy, on an energetic level. And it also reminds me of all the work that's been done by the HeartMath Institute, which is heart coherence.
Yes.
And the fact that you can be in the same space with someone and your heart rates will synchronize. There is a heart coherence, and that's been shown with animals, and that there's a coherence that happens, and that the rhythms, and if you go outside of the immediate proximity, that changes. And I think that that is obvious to people who like are in a space, because we all have people that we know who walk into a space and it's like all of a sudden they're there. It's like they didn't say a word, um, and they just have this energy about them that it's just immediate. And I think we've all had that, by living with people, by being, sharing something with someone, and that can be across the screen. And
Yep.
and I'm sure if we did our heart, I mean, they find it with veterans, or I think that that's what happens in, let's say, like a group yoga class, because the energy is like becomes there's like a synchronicity, like a synchronization, I think is a better word. Synchronization that happens.
It's almost like it amplifies. Sounds a lot like the Maharishi effect,
More
intertangling
about
things. It's well, I really don't see things as ironic anymore, but it's still fun to use that word. But I find it ironic that my morning post today was about plants, and I kind of broke down. I went more of a quantum route with this perspective, and I talked about how there's communication going on. You mentioned animals, and we're about empowering people and more, sure, but our plants too. There's a dialogue, if you will, a communication that's going on. Energy, sure, of course, but there's information moving.
Well, I know that the Heart Math Institute recently has done a lot of work in forestry and with trees, and the communication that happens between people and trees. And I think
Yeah.
we feel that all you have to do is spend time in a forest and you feel it.
Have you ever
Uh,
been to the redwoods in California?
Oh
uh-huh.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there have been certain places, like I remember, like that I've been, that I just know that I feel like if, at the time I thought to myself, and I used the word God, but I remember I felt that way the first time I went to the Rockies. I got out and I thought, if we believe in God and God lives anywhere, he lives here. Like that's how I felt. That's how I felt. And I felt that way. I felt that way in other places, but I think there is this certain dynamic energy. And I think that, you find that within forests, there's also communication that's a level that we don't like, that we're just learning about, that whole network of communication that happens amongst plants themselves. And
Fungus.
fungus, the phytochemicals that are released. This is my world. The phytochemicals that are released between them that communicate things like pests and illness, and they can be hundreds of miles away from each other, and they still get that communication.
Yeah.
And their chemical profiles will change based
Yeah.
on the messages they get, and they might not be around that pest at all, but they've gotten a warning, and all of a sudden their chemistry changes so that pest won't infest, and they can be hundreds of miles away from each other. Like it's pretty amazing.
I've known of birds. Well, actually, a lot of flying, migrating mammals and animals, insects too. They're Some have specific. How do I want to say receivers? Let's just call them receivers for what's going globally, and they all at the same time, doesn't matter. They know where to go. And I've seen more breakdowns scientifically of what might be going on there, but just to give an idea, there's communication, and
Yep.
often time and space is not as linked as much as we think it is. Maybe in a different way it's linked up, but it's not so linear. I always think that's amazing that flock of birds over here and 100 miles away, they know to do the exact same thing at the same time. I'm like, well, that's cool.
It's a
Yeah.
strong argument for quantum communication. It's like at a level, with a path that none of us could even fathom or understand. It's beyond understanding.
And that does that, and it's not only the communication on such a sensory level. Like I just remember that, when I was in New Jersey before Hurricane Sandy hit. So for days, I mean, they were talking about the hurricane, but it never like they didn't know if it was going to hit. They didn't know how much damage, what, like where, they never know exactly where. And I remember Tonka was fairly young. He was probably months old at the time. And for like a week before, he didn't want to do anything. He didn't want to play with any toys. It was kind of like he was in this corner. The storm hit. And the next morning, all of a sudden, every toy came out. It was like the pressure had changed, and all of a sudden, and he could feel it. because he's super like I mean, he'll start acting like funny hours and hours before there's a thunderstorm, like, probably in the morning if we're going to have one in the afternoon, kind of thing. And they have such an awareness about them, about what's happening environmentally, energetically. I mean, the same thing happens with people. Like, if he's in a space where there's all of a sudden the person and he'll act strange, it's like the energy that they're emitting, he doesn't like resonate with. And he'll be like, I don't know, something about this person I don't like.
And I think the really cool thing about people is, some might have a viewpoint that, oh, this person over here is special, and or they're really empathic, or they have some ability. Well, what I've observed and honestly seen and regurgitated by other people trying to explain maybe a more principle based truth is that we all have the potential of all the same abilities. Sometimes we go through different experiences to unlock, say, more of a purpose. Like, think of an example. I in 2018 I had a horrible compound femur accident, and so since we're talking about weather here, sometimes I can often sense from my leg, different. Usually it's like a bigger, like thunderstorm or a hurricane, not just like rain. But there's an opening of sensory receptivity going on there. I didn't, ask or work a skill to gain that, but that's something maybe small to show that all of these informations and signals, interpretations, abilities, skills, psychic, all the however you want to view it, we all have access to that same potential. It's how are we using? How are we responding with it or reacting with it?
And
I love.
are we open enough to hear it and listen to it?
Yeah.
The other thing is I think that we can get a lot of information like that and choose to ignore it.
Yeah, being a fellow empath, before I started to, get a more awareness around what is that and why is it that when, like you were talking about earlier, someone walks in a room and there's a dissonance from everyone else in the room, why is it that my attention would go right there? And I had to understand that while I might be perceiving it as a burden, there's a blessing to it also. It's just I looked at it as, in the medical world you would see it as overstimulation happening. In the metaphysical community they call it empathic. In self-help they call it, or quantum they call it, you're attracting your polarity. All these things are applying in their own way, but we have the ability in the same way to unlock these, call them psychic abilities, to be aware of how is this actually unlocking something else for me than what I'm just perceiving. And it could be as simple as you're in a room and someone makes a funny joke and you lock eyes with another gentleman and y'all are like giggling, but you're not laughing, but you're having a moment. That's it right there. And smaller than we think, these interactions are occurring. They're occurring so fast, so vast, so limitless, so infinite. Okay, I'm complete.
For now.
Yeah.
But the point is that happens. The interaction that you just talked about happens when you're around other people. That's not the kind of thing that can occur when you're alone. We are batteries. We have an electrical charge. We are most positively negative. And when somebody walks into the room, not everybody is the same charge all the time, though, And you can do this experiment, when you walk across the floor and you scuff your feet on a nylon carpeting, and then you discharge to somebody, we're doing that all of the time at such a low level that our perception to it is usually drowned out by all the other sensory perceptions that we have. But there have been people who have conducted studies of finding each other in the dark. And we're able to with being sensory deprived from vision and hearing, we're able to tell that somebody was around more and more and more with practice. It's like, as you said, when you think about your knee, and the definition of a savant is just knowing, right? It's a French word, and it actually means that somebody who knows, right? And you get somebody who's really good with math, or somebody who's somehow knows how to play the piano, and can make up, Mozart can whatever, at the drop of a hat. Um, all of us do have every one of those skill potentials. And it's like, the old story of the two wolves on your shoulders, the wolf that is constantly speaking good to you, and the other one that's speaking bad. The old sage Indian, says they're always going to be there on your shoulder. And then the young Indian says, yes, but which one wins? And he says, the one you feed.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So life is like that. Whatever you pay attention to gets amplified, it gets to become normalized, and then it gets internalized into your conscious, competence, and then you're going to be unconsciously competent at some point, which is why people are able to. In the old days, Austin, we used to have these things called desk phones and wall phones, and I tell you, it's a real thing that many of us would go and pick up the phone and say, "Hello, Mom." And she'd be there and it didn't ring. Or it would ring and you'd say, hello, Mom, or hello, whoever it was. It's not, you can't really replicate that experience with a cell phone for some reason.
I know that they've trained, and I say they as if I know.
Someone,
I
right?
know that we were talking about, expanding our own awareness of our abilities, our gifts, our uniqueness. And the great thing about them is we can expand on them, we can learn them, and we can also teach them. They're teaching, and there's that they again, I'm sorry, but they're teaching kids with blindfolds how to identify color, differentiate colors, the frequency from that, and feeling into that. I've seen such magic, well, things I would have before considered and did, like, oh, that's so cool, that's so magic. To kind of unfold the mystery and go down a little bit deeper in the rabbit hole.
Yep.
I don't remember what inspiration I got, but I wrote down this: the sum is greater than the whole of its part, or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But I can't remember what prompted me to write that down.
But I think about when you're talking about this, like we all have this ability, but I think that one is that we become distracted by the world, by all the, and I want to call it nonsense, like the noise.
Yeah.
And that is really, that really clouds or fogs our ability to see or to feel or to be that, to be whatever to amplify whatever we have. It pulls us out of ourselves and into, being distracted. And I think that that's really, when you talk about, to me, training or trying to cultivate that, it's your ability to be able to turn that off a little bit and to not have it be it like in quotes, it be your focus. Because it is distracting. How much time do I spend being distracted? I mean, I'm not a news watcher, so I can't really say that, but I do have friends who have the news on 24 hours a day. And I'm sitting there going like, first of all, no wonder you're anxious, kind of thing, and stressed and depressed. But there is this ability that, for whatever reason, for whatever it is the more we get pulled out.
And I think we have to start with what is pulling us out, and
Right.
why do I see it as pulling me out? What's the awareness behind the purpose of, is there something better I want? Do I know of something better I want? And what we allow to digest in us, whether orally, sight, it's
Right.
all playing into that, our personality, and what we're allowing us to respond to, or are we going to react to it? It's awareness.
Yeah, I heard an interesting interview recently, and they were talking about whether, like, if you are obsessed with watching the news, or whatever, what you do with that information. Like, are you doing it to somehow become more, to become more positive, like to do something that's going to make change, and that is the reason you're listening to it? But if you get that information and it's a constant drone of information, and you do absolutely nothing with it,
right?
Does it really serve a purpose?
Sounds like we're circling back to your previous statement about curiosity.
Exactly.
Ask questions. Why am I watching this? What am I getting from this? Is this actually nurturing me?
That's right. Is this actually helping me? Does it make me feel better? If it doesn't make me feel better, like maybe I need to make a different choice here, coming to the word curious and then opting to do something different or trying something different. If
Yeah.
you're getting on that mode of curiosity, it's like realizing like you can make a change and say, okay, this wasn't a good change, this I didn't get from this what I wanted to, I
And
live
Bill
my
will often and
yeah,
Bill will often talking about the courage behind that too, to even take that curiosity to its next step.
absolutely.
Which
Absolutely.
is still going to be asking questions, by the way. When you start to predict what you're going to do with this newfound wisdom, you're in big trouble. It just don't work that way.
It doesn't end.
You mentioned magic earlier, but I don't know if you're familiar with Arthur C. Clarke. He's a very, very notable science fiction writer, author, futurist, a great scientist, university professor, etc. And one of my favorite quotes that he has is that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Okay. And that means that, when you hold a cell phone in your hand and you've never seen one before, it's magic. You know, Sometimes the person who can interrupt their we all kind of behave like transistor radios that are all tuned to the same station all the time. We don't realize that there's another whole, millions of bands of information out there, and there's no way it can possibly get in because we're always tuned to the same station. So sometimes we have to be willing to realize that the only way to notice that there's more going on in the world is not to change the station, but turn off the transistor radio altogether, completely shut everything down for a minute or two every once in a while and just see what happens. Like an experiment. Try it for a while. If you don't like it, do something else. But
It's the story of my life. I live life like I'm an experiment. So I always love that. The scientist in me comes out because I'm like, okay, I'm just an experiment waiting. That's all I am. But I love not only the tuning, like the tuner, like I love that image, but also the idea of the volume. Like to me, the amounts that we, kind of like there is a, there is the ability to turn on like up a notch and down a notch. Like I talk about that a lot. Like, let's say in a physical, like yoga practice, like you can turn it up a notch and do this, or you can turn it down a notch and do this. And then you decide which one you need. Like you decide which one is going to better give you what you're looking for. And every now and then, like I said, you make a mistake and you're like, okay, I turned up the volume too loud on that one and I hurt myself, or I'm in a lot of pain or discomfort for the next 2 days. And certain days you sit there and it's all this kind of curiosity and practice of realizing there's no good or bad, sort of not like the wolves. It's not like good or bad. It's just information.
yeah. Yeah. What I love about what you're saying is it also points back to the thrownness of people to have to figure out what went wrong, why, like one and naming a feeling and all the rest of that. And you know what they say is if only name the things in your life you want to hang around, don't name things that you want to go away. Leave them alone, forget about them, but I think really when we're discussing all of this, it's a lot of conversation, all pointing to one particular place, which is called when you're having a reaction to the world somehow, own the reaction. Don't own the response. Own the reaction. They're quite different. When you take a moment to say, this is something that, as you said before, I responded to and not reacted to, you want to own the reaction because that's the thing you can do something about to turn it into a response, right? So when you're in a situation and things are not going well for you and you're feeling out of sorts, do something positive for yourself. Jan breathes. You can hum. You can tap your hand on your shoulder or on your head or something like that. Just interrupt the situation long enough to ask yourself 3 questions. The first one being, what am I experiencing right now in terms of, is it something I want or I don't want? If it's something that you don't want, then see if you can move on to another type of a feeling. Do anything, tell a joke, scream, just interrupt the behavior and change your state. But you might want to watch where you are first before you do all of those things. Otherwise, somebody might kind of throw a net over you. But the point is, I love this word that I'm toying with, but you're a master at describing this sovereignty thing. This means that not only are you entitled, to the dominion of who you are, your thinking, your persona, your you, but you're also responsible for that too. You must defend that when it needs defending, or not defend it when it doesn't need defending, and be smart enough to know which is which. All of those things go on in milliseconds at a time, about 80,000 times a day. And while we're going through all of that, sometimes we're a little tired. Sometimes we're invigorated. We never know for sure why that is. Why is, in one circumstance, this is really, really exciting. In another one, it's depressing.
I would say that one tip to follow what you're talking about here is be mindful of any assessing and like measuring the response, because owning doesn't necessarily mean response. As people, we have a tendency to want an answer, want a logical uh, response from the reaction. So you stub your toe, you're probably likely going to find something to blame it on. Oh, I hit the table. Oh, this, like we are almost addicted to, there has to be a reason to it. So I would just add to follow that up, to be mindful of how much am I measuring, because putting that much attention in trying to understand it fully and completely and wholly, as if that were possible, is actually using a lot of energy and towards of just being present with it, and doing, as you said, owning it, surrendering to it, accepting it, integrating it, even recognizing it, observing it, being curious about it. All kind of one and the same there. But where you put your energy, where you put your attention, energy grows. So you might be dispelling more than you actually wish.
Perfectly said. And all this happens in a millisecond.
Yeah,
This isn't for hours.
Energy does not necessarily respond to time or space. We get to funnel that in.
Agreed.
Yeah. But I'm thinking of like this whole idea of noticing. So of noticing. And the reason I said, because I've had a number of, let's say, animal encounters of late where I really feel like they had true meaning. Like, and so not looking at it as like, yes, there isn't an explanation for everything, and I don't need an explanation and need to go down that road for everything. But there are certain things that come in which are not what I might say what aren't normal. Like, really, the other day I turned, and right on the fence right next to my house was this eagle, was a young eagle. And I thought to myself, okay, like, like this to me was some sort of symbolic sign. I'm like, okay, what's it to me? What do eagles mean? What is that meaning for me? Then I went and looked up what the symbolism of eagles meant, just because I was curious to know, but it was, and then yesterday for like 3 hours, there was a dragonfly on my screen. And like, I thought to myself, like, first I didn't know what it was or whatever. Then I went, like, I came back like an hour later, it was still there. And it must have been on that screen, that same screen in that same spot for like 3 or 4 hours. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, wow, that's like, I'm really curious about that. And I know some symbolism of dragonflies. And then I went in and looked, but I don't want to miss those things. And I don't want to become like, I want to pay attention.
Yeah, I get that. And I think when you're measuring, it's taking you away from doing just that because you're so focused on, well, what does it
Right.
mean? Well, this.
I was like, at first, I years ago, I went to hear this, one of my favorite poets. And for him to read his poetry, and he talked about what, like where he was in life when he wrote the poems, which was really interesting. But I'd been reading his poetry for like years before that. And I was actually really happy that I didn't know the meaning of what he meant behind the poems, that I got my own meaning. And then I heard what he put in, like what he meant by writing the poem and where he was in his life. And that's how I kind of perceived, like, I didn't immediately say to myself, okay, what do eagles mean and whatever. And I was telling my friend this story, my friend Brita, who's like a shaman. And she said, well, what do you think eagles mean?
Hmm.
Like, what does it mean to you? What message do you think it's trying to give you? And then I looked up, some of the meaning, but it was much more like what did it mean to me? Like, what was it trying to, it did have a message, but it was a message, obviously. It came to me, so it was a message directly to me. It reminds me of like the images that come in dreams.
I love that. And I love that she afforded you the empowerment moment instead of giving you like an answer
Right, exactly.
or giving you a meaning. She was like, well, what does it mean to you? That's perfect.
It was interesting because I also heard an interview with this with a musician, a famous musician, and he was saying that people would come up to him all the time and say to him, "Oh, I loved your song. This is what it meant," and everything. He said, "To be honest, I just write the songs." He said, "Sometimes I don't understand their meaning. Like they just kind of flow out." Like he's like, and I thought it was so, because we have this idea in our head of like it, but it was like, oh my gosh, I love that song. And when you said this, it's so like, oh, I so got what you meant. And he's sitting there going like, I didn't know what it meant,
Explain it to me, please.
Exactly, exactly.
So here's really, excuse me, every time we talk, there are so many wonderful things that get said. But I would say if you remember only one thing from today, don't worry, be happy. I mean, seriously, we can be little significance monsters, meaning monsters, and the long and the short of it is while you're, as you said, when you're trying to figure out what happened to you, you're missing out on what's actually happening. You're away from living your life. You're now in the, not necessarily questioning, you're seeking the answer. Like, I can tell you truthfully, there's no truth in the world. We have a lot of agreement that you can go look up. But the truth is what you discover personally for yourself, that you don't have to check with anybody else. That's where truth lives. And while we're talking about empowerment, is your glimpses of the truth, not your truth that's different than other people that you got to explain to them. It has nothing to do with it at all. This has to do, where is that place where you feel whole and complete, satisfied, all of your great emotions at the same time. And sometimes it can even be a little bit scary, but it doesn't matter, because where you are is your authentic kernel of who you are in the world, experiencing yourself as fully as you possibly can for that moment. Most people can't stand doing that for more than a few moments at a time. As that famous quote once said, the person who can stand the silence of their own thoughts, that's the person who runs the world.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't have to. They're happy to let the world do what it does. They're busy doing other things. I think this is where we sort of wrap things up. It's been a wonderful conversation again. Who would like to go first?
We are not in the universe. The universe is within us. Rumi.
Yeah.
The universe is the answer. What questions, curiosity, wonders are we looking with? Are we asking ourselves? Are we focused on defining that answer or living the question? Now that came from me, but
It's really it's succinct, and at the same time it's also pithy. You know, the retort to that would be, the universe is also the question.
let's not get into paradoxes.
But the point is if you can have fun with a conversation like that and play, as
And
opposed to taking it on again like it's something to figure out and get an answer to, going for the answer is the booby prize. You know, it's the thing you walk away with. It leaves you completely dissatisfied, in my humble opinion, which is all you're ever getting from me. That and a lot of BS. So it really doesn't matter.
And I guess I'm sitting with this feeling of been focusing a lot on just this moment, in this moment. And that's the way I like constantly, I've just been in that space over the last few weeks. Right now, in this moment, this is perfect. This is what is. In this moment, for that sake, this moment is perfect. And so it's really, I mean, I know it's been helping me a lot. It's like getting me out of a lot of the stuff I tend to think about, which draws me out. I'm like, just right now, this moment is perfect. Don't think about any other moments, past moments, future moments. Just think about this moment.
That's it.
That's it.
Like
That's all
Jesus
there
said, we're right here, right now. There's
Right
no
now.
other place I'd rather be.
There's
Right.
only ever now. Yeah.
It's only for now, right?
Anything else, folks?
Nope.
Been an honor.
Yeah. See that we're racing to thank each other. That's a good thing.
I love sharing laughs with you guys.
We love you too. We definitely do. No doubt about it. And Jan, you know how I feel about you.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
And Tom.
Well, now that you asked the question, I better go find the answer, right?
Right, exactly.
So there's one more bit of work I want to give everybody, including you two fine folks. In our lives, especially now, there are people who are struggling. And I'm going to ask you, please reach out to somebody that you love and let them know that they're important in your life. And that if they ever need anything, you'll be there. And especially let them know that your life works because they're in it. I hate to ask you to do something with a negative. So be the person who is always there, as opposed to being the person who may not be. We're not that way. With all that said, we are lighting the candle, a world that works. I hope yours works a little bit better after today. Be well, everyone, and bye for now.
Bye, everybody.
Till next time.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.